Hello and welcome to The Rightest Leftist with Nathan Ogilvie, the podcast for the politically homeless. In this episode, I want to go a little bit more global and look at what I'm calling the boring centrism problem, because I'm seeing it playing out in Australia and actually all over the world in various ways. And it's something I want to cover off because I think it's a really important issue where it's sort of where what leads to the rise of these sort of right-wing populist figures like Donald Trump or Nigel Farage in the UK. And we've been seeing it in Australia with Pauline Hanson. Her party, One Nation, is now polling at about 15%, which has overtaken the Greens, who are at 11%. And I want to look at why, and I think I've sort of come upon the answer. So first of all, I just want to define what centrism is if you're kind of someone that you're interested in politics, but you don't really know or care about the definitions. I totally get that, but I kind of have a sort of a different definition than maybe what the dictionary would say. So the sort of a formal definition of centrism is adherence to moderate political views or policies, or the idea of carefully avoiding any of those political positions that might be seen as too far left or too far right, and trying to sort of take the average of the two parties and come to sort of a compromise deal. So what I call boring centrism is sort of similar to that definition, but it's more about playing it safe and making those incremental changes around the edges, rather than addressing core structural issues in society or of the problem. And you could apply that to any kind of political problem. The example that I've given that I think sort of highlights it well, because it's something that Labor has done since being elected in Australia, is our HECS debt, which is, if you're not Australian, that's our sort of student debt for university, where you take on a loan from the government that it doesn't have interest, but it gets indexed every year to inflation. So the cost of it does increase every year. And what Labor did recently, it still hasn't gone through yet, but it's been already ready to go, is they reduced people who currently have a HECS debt by 20% for those debt holders. Now, I disclose I am one of them. My debt is in the tens of thousands, and so I got a significant reduction of that debt. It's yet to go through, but I think it's actually going to go through in the next month or two, which is great for people like me. But where I see that as a sort of a boring centrist solution is, rather than doing some of the structural changes, like they could make university cheaper, my preference, if you haven't seen any of my videos, I like sort of the hybrid social democrat model where, I mean, in Scandinavian countries, university is completely free. I'm a little bit more capitalist than that I do think going to uni should be somewhat self-funded, so you see the value in that, and I do think an individual should pay somewhat for that. So I think it should be 50-50 funded. So I think half of the fee should be on the student and the government should cover half. I think that's very fair. Or even holding universities, even going further and holding them accountable with a freeze on fees, because some of those fees are getting out of control. I teach at one of the unis, and I know what the fees are for students to pay. And I mean, they might pay it back when they get these good paying jobs, if those jobs are still there, if they're not replaced by AI. But this is the problem, is that the government gets in on this sort of centrist platform of trying to balance all the different competing interests in a country, and then they really just deliver these tiny little changes. And I know that sort of creates that sort of feeling of stability, I guess, and not radically changing a system, which can have impacts. You know, you can't really change a system too quickly without getting some kind of shockwaves and consequences, or you do need to at least get the votes, as this is what Obama would say, is he couldn't get like what we call in Australia Medicare, which is that single payer healthcare where the government basically foots the bill for your healthcare. The US is the only developed country that doesn't have that. And Obama, in one of his recent interviews with Mark Maron, even said he couldn't get the votes for it, so you need to go to the next best thing, and which for him was the Obamacare, which was still private health, and try and increase that. And look, that's the argument for centrism, that a little bit of a positive change is better than nothing, and you can hope for a better tomorrow and keep making those small changes as you go. But what we find actually, or what I'm seeing, and I'm calling it the boring centrism cycle, and if you're interested in politics, you probably wouldn't have got to this part in the video if you're not. But I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. Please comment what you think about this cycle, if you've noticed this in your own country, or if you are from Australia or the US or UK, which I'm going to look at. Do you feel like this is what's playing out? So what I feel like happens is, after a period of a government not delivering, the everyday people start getting fed up because they don't see their lives improving and they want to change. So the example I've sort of given is that George Bush era in the US, even towards the end, by like about 2008, even Republicans, his approval rating was, I think, around 20% or even lower by the end. It shot up to like over 90% with 9/11 as the country rallied around him, and then it just dropped off a cliff as people realized that they were never going to deliver for the people. So then what happens is people want that. They want that sort of sense of stability, or a government that will deliver for them, and they want that hope. That's what they're looking for. And so, Barack Obama, don't need to explain who he is, in 2008 came along and met that moment exactly how he wanted, because he was actually up against Hillary Clinton in 2008, and she was going to deliver more of that status quo, more of that that not delivering for the people. So that's how Obama got in. But then what happens in the step 3, which is kind of like 2 steps, but I kind of merged it into one, because what then happens is that boring centrist will get in, and what they'll do is they'll keep playing it safe. They'll end up not delivering for the people, which of course obviously leads to people being frustrated again. And instead of then electing somebody who could bring true change, and in this case, going with America, someone like a Bernie Sanders, who, wants to have every American to have healthcare and a good job and raise the minimum wage and all these things that would genuinely economically help everyday Americans, that frustration is ripe for exploitation by far right-wing, often populist figures who give a simple story to a very complex problem. And so someone like a Donald Trump, who just blamed the immigrants and said, build the wall. And we in Australia, we had Tony Abbott, who said, stop the boats, punching down, getting everyday people to, instead of go, hang on, big businesses and billionaires are screwing us over and they've rigged the system. No, instead of that, let's just blame poor people and immigrants who are just trying to make their lives better. And the government, who is run, we all know that big business and lobbyists run the government. That's who let the immigrants in. But the simple narrative often wins. And if you have that charismatic figure like a Donald Trump, they often come in a landslide. And then we get back to step 1, where after a period of not delivering, which already happened with Trump once, and it's already happening again, we go back into the same cycle. And I find that very frustrating, because we never really then give the true person who's going to make the change a go. And so in Australia, it kind of looks like we've got this sort of played out with, we got so fed up with our friend Scott Morrison. If anyone who is watching this is not Australian, Scott Morrison had this dorky dad image. He was the prime minister during COVID, and he sort of went away. We had these really terrible bushfires, and he decided to go on a trip to Hawaii. Just a horrible leader. Didn't care, just wanted the title of prime minister, didn't want to do the work. And so people got fed up with him and went to Albanese, who is now managing as our boring centrist and delivering those incremental changes around the edge. Now, I definitely agree that those incremental changes are better. And the Australian people sort of decided that, because even in the last election, Peter Dutton, who was leaned into the Trump thing, he pulled away from it, but it was too late after Trump won and he sort of went in for Trump. People still avoided that extreme in Australia. But if you look here, our sort of populist choice was Adam Band, and he's now lost his seat. And looking back, the more I look back, I like his shirt choice. He has good taste in those light sky blue shirts like I do. But other than that, he was a pretty horrific leader. And so Australia's sort of settled on that boring centrist. And this is what happens. You'll see this play out as well in the US. I talked about George Bush, but this happened too with Joe Biden. So people got fed up with Trump, and instead of going for a true choice of someone that could actually make change, and Bernie Sanders, I believe, is that person. Maybe you think that the changes are a little too far, but it would definitely benefit everyday Americans. People chose Joe Biden as a safe choice. And then what happened? Joe Biden didn't deliver. Again, he would say it's not necessarily his fault, but people went back to Trump, in that cycle because they got frustrated with a boring centrist in Joe Biden not delivering. And they saw, I know Kamala Harris was the nominee last election, but she, again, saying that she wouldn't do anything different to Joe Biden, missed the moment and didn't offer that broad change that Americans desperately want. It's playing out in the UK as well. We've got Keir Starmer, who is currently the Prime Minister. He was the Prime Minister for the Labour Party, which is a very similar party to the Labour Party in Australia, sort of the centre-left kind of party, but he's playing it like a boring centrist. And he's tanked Labour's polls, and I think they're actually third or even fourth party now because the former Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn, started his own party and is eating into their votes. And that's leading to Nigel Farage, who's on the left there. Where's my hand? Here. Nigel Farage, who is sort of the right-wing figure, kind of like if you're in Australia, the Pauline Hanson, or almost like the Donald Trump in America. And his party is leading the polls. And if things go the way they're going, he may win the election and become Prime Minister. And they're basically an anti-immigrant party, blaming all the economic issues on immigration. And then you've got there Zach Polanski, who, let's see how far he goes, but he is the sort of the Green Party leader, which is kind of the left-wing party, the progressive, the social democrat who is talking about affordability and economic inequality and trying to deliver for everyday UKers. Do they call themselves UKers or Britons? Whatever they call themselves, he's the real deal there, trying to win votes over from the far right that Nigel Farage is just destroying. I don't know much about UK politics. I'm following it tangentially from a few YouTube channels that I watch, but I think most people are agreeing that Keir Starmer has absolutely messed things up, delivering as a boring centrist when the UK has a lot of, we think we're in a housing crisis. They're in a huge housing and economic crisis over there. And the boring centrist, this is my whole point, is they don't deliver when it comes to crisis. Those incremental changes around the edges, when you have a society that is struggling, are not what people want. And people punish them for that, and they vote them out. So the argument then I hear is that, are we just doomed to boring centrism? Is that sort of the best we get? Because once you have someone who genuinely cares for the people and wants to deliver and has that platform of policies that will help, and they get blocked, do we just have to settle for a boring centrist? And I'm going to give you an example here. This is, if you don't know, this is Claudia Sheinbaum, who is the Mexican president. And she came in on a platform of helping everyday people, taxing the ultra wealthy, fighting corruption, increasing social services and things like that, things that people desperately need. And her approval, have a guess. You can look it up on your own. I'll tell you. If you're thinking, okay, she's probably tanking, or, all those fear things that all the rich people are going to leave Mexico and it's going to become a disaster. She's polling at about 70% or even a little bit more, depending on the poll. She is absolutely loved in her country. And again, she's not perfect. She has her haters and things like that. So I'm not portraying her as anything super special, but she has taken on that uncompromising message of, I'm going to fight for the people and I'm actually going to have my government deliver for the people. And she's being rewarded, and she's very likely to win the next election, all things being equal, because she is actually delivering for the people of Mexico. And the odd sort of funny thing is, if you look at how Trump talks about her, because they couldn't be different politically except the sort of the populist angle, and populism is essentially fighting for the policies for everyday people. Trump is a fake one, of course. He doesn't actually care. But he actually kind of respects her. He doesn't really say anything negative about her. And apparently they've got a decent working relationship. So if you stand up and fight for the people, you can command respect from people that dislike you, because at the very least, they can't say that you're not for the people. And if their argument is you're bad because you're for everyday people, well, that's probably more on your detractors than on you at that point, I would say. The one that really gives me hope, and I'm recording this on the day that he won, this is, if you don't know, Zoran Mamdani. He is now the mayor of New York City. He was an assemblyman, so basically for New York State government, he was like a politician, and he ran a campaign for mayor of New York City, and his focus was on the economic issues that affect everyday New Yorkers, on affordability, freezing rents for rent-controlled apartments, free public transport, taxing the ultra-wealthy an amount like other states do, so not making them poor or anything, just taxing them what they owe, or what they should owe based on their success and their use of the public utilities to have that level of wealth. He won in a landslide. He crushed it. The votes are still being counted as I record this, but he definitely won, and won decisively. And that's because his message was for everyday people, and that he was going to deliver for everyday people. Now, obviously, he's been met with a lot of skepticism, and we'll have to see how he goes. And I'll probably check in every so often. You know, New York politics isn't my area of expertise, but he is an example of, if you talk in language that helps everyday people, and your policies are to help everyday people, eventually people will get fed up enough. Because in New York, it's something like people who are making 150,000 US dollars a year were still struggling, still paying over half their income towards rent. So even the people in like the top 10% of incomes or something ridiculous like that were struggling with the cost of living in New York City. And obviously New York City is one of the most expensive cities in the world, so it has its own issues. But this is an example of someone who ditched the boring centrist angle, said we're going to make some bold changes. Yes, that might mean a bit of a transition period, and maybe it'll be met with resistance and I'm going to have to fight. But the fight is worth it, and he won. And I would love to see someone in Australia like a Zoran Mamdani, because at the moment we don't have that. We have kind of the Teals who are trying to make more structural changes, and they're quite bold in their policies. And that's where my angle is at the moment. Is I consider myself an independent, and next election I don't intend to vote for one of the major parties. But someone like Zoran, his win and his decisive win has given me some kind of hope that we might be able to escape that boring centrism cycle, because this is where I see it going with the Labor government in Australia, that they're not going to deliver for the people ultimately, and people will get fed up and go to someone like a Pauline Hanson or our right wing, and that would just be the worst thing, because we think we're struggling now with our poverty rates. 1 in 7 people in poverty, 1 in 5 households, it's just come out today, 1 in 5 households are extremely food insecure, meaning they don't know if they're going to be able to feed themselves for the week. We have big problems on the horizon, and we need those Zoran Mamdanis and those bold people who care about everyday people and the cost of living and the economy. And so let me know your thoughts on the boring centrism cycle. Am I way off and inaccurate, or am I touching on something that's real? So leave a comment, subscribe, like, all the good stuff. My name is Nathan Ogilvie. This is The Rightest Leftist, and we will talk again very soon.